what does Benavidez do?
Don't tell me he jumped.
He jumped from the helicopter. Okay. Now, by the way, the accounts say that he jumped from 30 feet. Now, I can't believe that. Like, I know that these guys are trained and they can roll and stuff like that.
Well, and
But
he's got, like, essentially new legs, right? So, I mean,
right,
the odds of him
right,
getting hurt are, like,
right,
greater than yeah.
right. So let's assume he jumped from like, 15 to 20 feet, rolled on the ground. Um, but here's the crazy thing. He went into this combat zone with a medical bag and a knife. That's it. Okay.
He literally brought a knife to a gunfight.
He literally brought a knife to a gunfight.
Hey, welcome everybody back to WTF History. Glad to be back here with my co-host Mike Gatto. How you doing, Mike?
Guy did the realtor thing. Good to see you. But I'll tell you one thing. We got a comment on our last video that said they don't like the banter at the beginning. They like when we
Oh,
go
well, let's go.
like,
Let's go. What do you
yeah.
got today, Mike? Take us to history.
Well, so look, we have covered in the past some amazing examples of battlefield bravery from World War II, from the Napoleonic Wars. You remember the story of the guy who had his horse shot out 5 times in one battle.
Mhm.
Today, I want to turn to some stories of incredible bravery from the last declared major U.S. war. And of course, that's the Vietnam. Do you read much about Vietnam?
You know what? I did at one time, but it was pushed out by all the other stuff I've learned. No, and I mean, I'm not joking about that. Like at one time, I had read a number of books about Vietnam,
Sure.
and I did. But as you get older, you just put so much more garbage in your head, and it kind of gets pushed out. So,
Well, what's fascinating to me is that, when you and I were growing up, World War II was sort of like the classic car. What I mean by that is there's always an era where it's right before a certain era, but there's still this collective memory of it. And, it
good point.
captivates people for that
Hmm.
reason. And
Good point.
I think, as memories of World War II are sadly fading, Vietnam
Mhm.
is now becoming that. It was long enough ago that it's sort of in the history books, but if to young kids right now, it feels like ancient history, right?
You know what? You're right because it ended in 74, right? Or
Yeah,
75. When it right around there, 84, 94, 04, 14. That was 50 years ago. So you're
yeah,
right. It would be the equivalent if I was a kid in the 90s talking about World War II.
precisely.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. But all right, well, let's get right into these fascinating stories of bravery from the Vietnam War. First, I want you to imagine that you're a kid fresh out of high school, and you enter the army, and you are sent to Vietnam, and it's late 1965, and this is when the conflict is widening. You were thrown into this conflict right as it's heating up, and now you are thrown into the Battle of La Drôme. And for those of you who are not familiar with this battle, it was really brutal. It was the first brutal battle of the war. And it was really tough on the US Armed Forces. And at this battle, you've been hit. And you're critically wounded. You are bleeding out. Your unit is surrendered, and you're outnumbered 8-1. And the enemy fire is so intense from such close quarters that as you lay there, and you can kind of hear this as you lay there, you hear your commanding officer order that the medevac flights stop because the fire is just so intense. There's no safe place for them to land. So you lie there and you're listening to the machine gun fire and the sounds of the battle. You've heard your CO and maybe one of the other wounded guys tell you there's no help coming. And so you're thinking of your family halfway across the world that you left behind. You're thinking about your short life. And as you start to fade in and out, you're probably thinking, this is my day. My time has come. But then over the sounds of battle, you hear the faint sounds of a helicopter. You're like, what's going on? The medevac flights were ordered to stop. I heard that. Everybody knows it. We kind of came to peace with it. And you kind of gaze up and you see a Huey, and it's an unarmed Huey. It's struggling to land, and you're wondering, like, what's going on? Well, the pilot drops the helicopter in, and before you know it, you're being loaded aboard, and eventually you're taken back to base. And you're probably wondering, well, who was that pilot? And it was a guy by the name of Ed Freeman. And Ed Freeman is not just a story of incredible bravery. He's also a story of, when you hold somebody back from something for so long that when they're finally given a chance, they really do a good job, right? It's like, the kid who was on the sidelines of football and you let him in, and, they make movies about this concept, right? So that was Ed Freeman. Ed was born in Mississippi, and he was the sixth of 9 children. And he served in the Navy in World War II. He was on a boat, but he told his buddies, "I really want to be a pilot. I really want to be a pilot." Well, he enlisted again, and he was put in the infantry in Korea. He was at Pork Chop Hill, which was the bloodiest battle in Korea.
Yeah.
And he was, of the 257 men who were initially engaged in that battle, he was one of 14 survivors. And he got a battlefield commission. Super rare these days, but then,
Yeah.
still common. He got a battlefield commission that day as a lieutenant. And, he was thinking two things. Hey, I survived, which was amazing. And secondly, now I can become a pilot. Right. So after his wounds healed, he formally applied to be a pilot. What did the Army say? Said, "You're too tall. You're too tall to be a pilot." And because these were cramped little,
No,
World
it
War
isn't
II.
that. Yeah, I was in the
Yeah,
Air Force. That's a thing. Yeah,
yeah,
for real.
yeah. And finally, between Korea and Vietnam, they lift the height limits, and he reapplies, and they say, "You can become a pilot. You're going to pilot helicopters." So he's promoted to captain, and he stays in the service when the Vietnam War broke out. But what they assigned him to do is recon and mapping missions. So he's got a helicopter that's just doesn't have weaponry on it. He's doing reconnaissance and mapping. So on the fateful day, first day of the Battle of Ladrong, he heard the frantic calls from the battlefield begging for anybody to come help them. And he also heard the order halting the medevac flights. Too dangerous, no helicopter can land, turning the medevacs back. But he said, "You know what? I'm coming anyway." And he flew down amidst the machine gun fire, and he got out the young soldier that we were talking about this. But you probably remember from our story about the guy who had the travails during the Napoleonic Wars. He didn't stop. He flew 13 more flights. 13 more flights that everybody had agreed were too dangerous for one medevac flight. He flew 13 more flights. He evacuated 30 men, most of which, all of them, wouldn't have made it if it wasn't for Captain Freeman. When he made it back to base himself after the 13 flights, his crew was like, "Hey, you're right there," and they helped him get out of the kept out of the they helped him get out of the helicopter, and they touched blood. They realized he had been hit 4 times on
Oh man.
these flights. And the crazy thing, and this is what's so crazy, and there's a theme in both of my Vietnam stories today, is that his heroics were largely forgotten in the chaos of the ever expanding war at the beginning. His commanding officer didn't nominate him for a Medal of Honor until after the deadline had passed. And, it's just like, he didn't ask for it, and there was no thing. It's just everybody knew that the Vietnam War was getting real crazy real fast. But when people realized what he had done, and they went back and they talked with the guys and were like, "Yeah, man, we thought it was over. I mean, you know, there was nobody coming to get us." He got his Medal of Honor. It took
Mm,
36 years,
that's
but
awesome.
he finally got his Medal of Honor. And for me, it is just such a amazing story of incredible bravery. And that is
Do
Captain Ed Freeman.
do
May his name
do
never be.
do we know where he ended up after the war? Did you do any?
He went to Boise, Idaho.
Are
And
you kidding me?
yeah, no, dead serious, Boise, Idaho. And that's where he passed away.
He just lived a life, just a
Yeah,
regular guy.
lived
That's
a
what I
life
like.
like a good guy. Called to the White House in 2001. It was like, "Hey, man, you remember what you did 36 years ago? He got a Medal of Honor." Crazy.
What I like is that so many of these war heroes that we talk about, they're walking past us in the streets. I mean,
Yeah,
nowadays they're probably very old. Well, maybe not. Wait, with what's happening, the recent combats in the Middle East, but so many of them are just walking by quietly,
for
and
sure.
they don't wear a T-shirt saying, "Hey, I saved lives," or "Hey, I risked
For
my life." They just live a quiet life,
For sure. Yeah,
and
I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing how many of these guys too were semi-forgotten. And I'll tell you how our next Vietnam hero was what I say twice forgotten. And also, I got to tell you, this next story is so unbelievable that I had to verify it from multiple sources to understand that it was true. So this is the story of Roy Benavidez. And I got to say, David, that After reading this story, you are now my second favorite Tex-Mex veteran because this guy, oh my God, this story was so wild that I didn't believe it. So Benavidez was born in a tiny little town in DeWitt County, Texas, probably one of those counties that we did another episode on the LBJ
Right,
boats. And
right.
he was orphaned. He was orphaned early, but he grew up just like Freeman, and he served in the Korean War. And he came home and he applied to go to special forces, and he got admitted into the Army's elite special forces. And like Freeman, he was sent to Vietnam in 1965, early days of war, right when it's really, really heating up. And like Freeman, he was sent on recon, except he's an infantryman, so this was on foot. Roy Benavidez stepped on a landmine, and he had horrible, horrible injuries. And he was told he would never walk again. And he was prepped for discharge with full medical disability for life. His hands were also damaged from the landmine, and he would get out of bed at night when the doctors were not looking, and he would crawl using his elbows and his chin to pull him along to get to the wall. And he would then try to lift himself up to force his body to stand. And he would try to wiggle his toes. He would try to move his ankles a little bit, and he would try to stand. And after several months of doing this, he could move his toes. And after a year of his self generated physical therapy, he walked out of that hospital.
Oh my god.
And we could stop our story right there, right? Super inspiring story.
Yeah.
That's not where this story ends. Uh, Benavidez re-enlisted, and he went back to Vietnam, volunteered to go back to Vietnam. And in 1968, he too heard a radio call, and he heard that 3 of his special forces brothers and 9 friendly Vietnamese were surrounded by a Viet Cong battalion of 1,000 men. Okay, so it's literally 1,000 to 12. And he's like, "Hey, I got to get out my special forces brothers."
I was
So he
built for this.
volunteers to help, hitches a ride on a helicopter, and when he gets there, the pilot's like, I am not landing in the middle of that. What does Benavidez do?
Don't tell me he jumped.
He jumped from the helicopter. Okay. Now, by the way, the accounts say that he jumped from 30 feet. Now, I can't believe that. Like, I know that these guys are trained and they can roll and stuff like that.
Well, and
But
he's got, like, essentially new legs, right? So, I mean,
right,
the odds of him
right,
getting hurt are, like,
right,
greater than yeah.
right. So let's assume he jumped from 15 to 20 feet, rolled on the ground. Um, but here's the crazy thing. He went into this combat zone with a medical bag and a knife. That's it. Okay.
He literally brought a knife to a gunfight.
He literally brought a knife to a gunfight. So he goes around just helping the wounded because these guys are in bad shape. And, he's administering stuff, he's bandaging them up, he's giving them some ammo, stuff like that. But at some point, a Viet Cong soldier charges him and stabs him with a bayonet. Okay. He grabs the gun, pulls it out with his other hand, knifes the guy and kills him, captures the guy's AK 47, and now he's in business. Okay. So he starts fending off the enemy and long enough to drag some of the wounded men to a helicopter that did land. And but that pilot who didn't listen to the previous pilot is shot and dies.
Uh,
Okay. So now he's just back to being trapped with no rescue. So he keeps fending off the enemy and everything like that. Now, a little bit later, another helicopter lands. And at this moment in the battle, Benavidez has been bayoneted. He's been wounded in his right leg and his face and his head.
and he jumped out of a helicopter.
And he had jumped out of a helicopter. And he's
Right.
only been walking for about a year. Right.
Yeah, right.
So he goes around and he's recovering classified documents because apparently there were some classified documents there that the guys were told to get out. He's distributing ammunition to the small group of survivors. And this is the crazy thing. He finds a phone and he's got the presence to call in airstrikes. Right? So he's like calling in positions and they're doing airstrikes, something like that. And then he continues under just devastating fire to carry the wounded to this one helicopter that's functioning. And on the way to this helicopter, he's clubbed in the head by another Viet Cong soldier. And when he gets there, he spots 2 Viet Cong sneaking around out of view of the the aircraft door gunner, and he kills them. So that helicopter takes off, and Benavidez volunteers to stay back. Like, and he just he goes around and makes sure that the dead are dead, but that there's no more wounded left, and that all the classified documents are gathered. And when the next helicopter landed, they pulled all the remaining guys who could be saved on board, including Benavidez. He has been there for 6 hours, 6 hours fighting off 1,000 men, 6 hours, in this god awful battle scene, and he's in bad shape. They make it back to base camp really quickly, and he's examined, and he's declared dead. He's placed in a body bag, and they start lifting them over to the other dead in body bags. And as the doctor is zipping up the body bag, Benavidez spits in his face.
Yeah.
Okay. He couldn't talk. So he's rushed into surgery where the doctors discover that he has been wounded 37 times.
Good God.
Bullets, shrapnel, stabbings, clubbings, bayonet wounds, you name it. 37 times. But he survives again. He survives again. And again, amidst the chaos of war, later on, he's nominated for a Medal of Honor. Too late after the nomination period. But the Army, there's really no doubt what he did, because everybody knew how bad this battle was, and there's radio calls, and it was like contemporaneously reported. But the problem is that, and the Army wanted to like pull strings for him and get him his Medal of Honor, but the problem is that there are no known survivors from that day except for him. But years later, the Vietnam War has come and gone. In the 1980s, there's an eccentric serviceman who was at the battle who has a really common name, Brian O'Connor, and the Army could not locate him. These were like the two of the survivors, him and Benavidez, and they just couldn't locate them. It turns out that this guy had he had what we now call PTSD. He had relocated to Fiji, and he was just a recluse. But he goes on vacation to Australia, and he's reading it, and he finds it. And there's a newspaper article just on that day about how this guy did this crazy stuff, and he can't get the Medal of Honor because there's nobody alive who was there. And Brian O'Connor is like, hey, I was there. And the Army, verifies, like, yeah, this is Brian O'Connor. We just didn't know where he was. He's in Fiji, in the highlands of Fiji somewhere. Mm. So he submits, a 20-page declaration and talks about everything that happens. And again, decades later,
yeah,
Benavidez finally gets his Medal of Honor. Here's the crazy thing, though. I told you he was sort of twice forgotten.
Yeah.
At some point, his benefits were cut off. Too.
Jesus.
And he actually had to go talk to Congress and be like, some of us have really had it rough, and you shouldn't cut off our benefits. This was a guy who had to learn how to walk again, and who suffered horribly in combat and had his benefits cut off. So, again, so many themes in this, but man, incredible bravery.
Yeah. Do we know do you know like where he moved to, where he lived out the rest of his life or anything?
I forgot. I think he's lived out the rest of his days in Texas.
I think every Mexican in Texas has an uncle named Roy Benavidez. That's a good Texas, old school Texas name, man. I can picture the guy right now.
Yeah.
Playing the guitar at a barbecue, singing some Jose Feliciano songs. So I got this guy. What a man.
He's that guy who's tough as nails.
Yeah. Right.
He'll get back into shape if you get out of line. That's Roy.
Never worked out in his life, but he can carry a dresser drawer up a thing of stairs. You're like, damn.
Yes.
Who is this
guy? The Italian community has that too.
What a great story, Mike. That is good. Roy Benavidez from DeWitt County, Texas. We should know his name. We do this so often, though. We have all of these characters. It's weird who history chooses to remember and who history chooses to shut the door on. But so many of these people, we should know their names, and including on our next episode, the person that I'm going to talk about. I look forward to that. But hey, man, thanks, Mike. This has been a good one. I really appreciate these stories of these war heroes.
And for our viewers, listen, say these guys' names, ensure that they're never forgotten. Drop a comment. Spread this story. People need to hear these stories of Ed Freeman and Roy Benavidez. These are true heroes in a time when we need heroes.
That's right. Thanks, Mike. See you guys soon. Hey, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe. It really means a lot, and we would love to have you coming back every week. Thank you.